D'accord. Tu peux parler pour qu'on voit si on t'entend toujours pas. Là, on t'entend. Là, c'est mieux.
Bon, bah, c'est mon document alors. Bon, génial, on va faire
Bon,
comme ça.
tu vois notre avenir numérique est quand même pas réjouissant, hein. Pour revenir au sujet qui nous occupait.
Oui, bah, c'est un très bon exemple, c'est-à-dire le, la question c'est la question c'est la question de l'offre et la demande, c'est la question du désir, c'est la question du besoin de la nécessité. Euh, on peut contrôler les désirs humains. Dans l'histoire, ça a été fait. Bon, c'est pas forcément ce que je recommande. Sur la nécessité et l'environnement, il y a quand même des choses qu'on sait. En 2050, on doit être neutre en carbone. On est aujourd'hui à 25% d'électricité en consommation. L'électricité, c'est une énergie intéressante, quel que soit son mode de production. Il faudrait être à 50% en 2050. Et les nouvelles technologies d'interconnexion vont permettre la facilitation de l'électricité. C'était notamment...
Attends. C'est de nouveau.
Allô?
Oui. Ah, ça y est, c'est bon de nouveau. Oui, c'est bon.
D'accord.
Vas-y, excuse-moi.
Non, non, je t'en prie. Donc, le numérique, dans la nécessité, permet de gérer et de développer la diffusion de l'énergie électrique. Donc, il y a des choses intéressantes. Sur la question du désir, euh, c'est vraiment une question de démocratie, c'est-à-dire, sommes-nous capables, et les entreprises peuvent-elles avoir un comportement adéquat, adapté, et peut-on et doit-on faire des produits avec les gens ou doit-on faire des produits sans les gens? C'est la question posée par le open source. Le numérique a en son sein des modèles. Là où il est un peu immature, en tout cas en Europe, c'est qu'il a besoin des Américains pour penser, ce qui a le don de m'énerver, notamment la question des communs, qui est typiquement anglo-saxonne, alors qu'en Europe, on aurait plutôt parlé peut-être d'intérêt général et de choses inaliénables comme l'eau, l'air, etc. Euh, C'est-à-dire qu'il y a une impensée du numérique européenne par rapport à ce que nous sommes et par rapport à notre histoire humaniste et philosophique, et donc par exemple à l'histoire du design qui en fait partie un petit peu, ou l'histoire de la création et de l'art, pour essayer de créer une voie qui est notre voie, c'est-à-dire ne pas penser que le marché peut tout réguler. Il peut faire beaucoup, il peut assurer une croissance vitale. Alors une croissance qu'il faut qualifier, est-ce qu'elle est quantitative ou qualitative? Comme Jean-Marie Masson en parle dans l'Expo Designer du Design. Bien évidemment, le modèle, c'est la croissance vitale organique qualitative et pas quantitative. Et comment on régule tout ça? Comment on le gouverne? Sachant que le numérique a en son sein beaucoup de réponses. Là où il a peut-être le plus de déficit, c'est d'une pensée spécifique européenne au-delà de la régulation. Et je suis en grand déficit de ça. C'est pour ça que finalement, les gens les plus intéressants dans ces questions-là sont bon, soit des juristes, soit des philosophes, soit parfois des artistes, mais rarement des spécialistes du numérique. Euh, Parce que même si j'ai une passion absolue pour les scientifiques et les grands ingénieurs qui ont permis cette technologie-là, comme Louis Pouzin par exemple, parfois il faut une conversation, un débat vraiment lourd, profond, philosophique dans le temps pour arriver à construire les choses. Je ne parle pas des gadgets genre convention citoyenne, ces choses-là qui sont biaisées, enfin on le voit malheureusement.
Allô, allô. Allô.
Et, et donc de valoriser les gens qui pensent. Je ne parle pas de moi, hein, je ne parle pas de toi, je parle
Ouais.
vraiment de gens, de chercheurs, de philosophes, de sociologues qui ont travaillé sur la réalité d'un corpus, c'est-à-dire d'une recherche scientifique sérieuse. Et c'est absent du débat, et notamment d'une pensée européenne. Non pas que l'Europe est le centre de tout et que notre survie est en notre sein, mais penser à partir de là où on est et ce qu'on a envie de bâtir ensemble, ça me semble quand même une nécessité.
Tu penses pas que au sein de ces réflexions qui doivent tout à fait, je suis d'accord avec toi, se développer sur sur une pensée un peu particulière, pas trop uniquement focalisée sur l'anglo-saxon. Je pense qu'il y en a plusieurs qui peuvent être intéressantes, mais cette question qui peut-être a plus directement trait à d'éventuelles capacités qu'aurait le design d'intéresser ou de faire que un certain ralentissement, certaine soustraction soit aussi fascinante que l'accélération.
Le numérique, il a dans ses gènes une échelle temporelle qui est différente de la nôtre. Je m'amusais, mais il y a très longtemps, quand j'étais à l'école, quand j'ai commencé à enseigner, de dire qu'une année de numérique, c'est comme une année de chien, c'est 7 ans. Donc une année numérique, ça vaut 7 ans de vie normale. Mais c'est assez vrai. Bon. La question, c'est parce que dès qu'on dit ralentir, il y a la question d'une mort de la conquête qui est pour moi le propre de la vie humaine, au sens biologique. Hein. La croissance, c'est la vie. Il y a en tout cas la question d'un chemin qualitatif plus que d'un chemin rapide, hystérique ou uniquement marchand. Ce qui est sûr, c'est que dans le monde tel qu'on le connaissait avant, on savait qu'un artisan qui vous écoutait quand il vous fabriquait un sabot donnait un résultat meilleur que l'industriel qui vous faisait un sabot pas cher mais qui vous avait pas beaucoup écouté. Ouais. Et donc, ces apprentissages de l'art de faire les choses, ce design des choses, et peut-être ce qui manque au numérique pour arriver à avoir une densité de réponses adaptée, c'est-à-dire faire des tuyaux en ayant une promesse de grand débit sans imaginer ce qu'on va faire avec. C'est effectivement pas bon, mais penser comme certains l'inverse, c'est-à-dire qu'on pourra avoir des usages. Pour moi, le design, c'est l'interface, c'est-à-dire c'est la posture qui essaye de. L'invention de l'imprimante a déterminé des divisions de la pensée. Par contre, il faut qu'il y ait un dialogue, une symbiose, une réflexivité avec ceux qui le travaillent, les imprimeurs de Bruges, qui ne sont pas très loin de Lille, qui ont inventé la division de la pensée, qui ont demandé à Plantin la typo parce qu'ils étaient imprimeurs et ils faisaient du papier. Bon, on façonnait la technologie pour en faire autre chose, c'est-à-dire des outils de diffusion de pensée qu'on appelle le livre. Et c'est ça qui est intéressant. Si on oublie ça, et qu'on dit la 5G, point, l'Internet à haut débit, point, ou le numérique pour le numérique, point, c'est sûr que c'est
pas suffisant.
On va pas y arriver. Ça, c'est évident. Mais il nous faut absolument un débat pacifié. Et pour cela, il faut que des deux côtés, on ait connaissance de l'autre. Alors, pour les artistes, je me mets dans les artistes, il faut une connaissance de la technologie. Et puis, pour les gens de la technologie, une connaissance, pas forcément de l'art, bien que Marius Vachon, en 1986, le pointait en parlant de la France, mais en tout cas de ce qu'est un corps social, pourquoi pas de la sociologie, hein, pas comme une commodité comme Orange l'a fait longtemps, on a des sociologues, c'est bon, on a compris. Non, il faut la comprendre, il ne faut pas juste l'utiliser. Et ça, c'est la question de la formation transdisciplinaire, c'est-à-dire au-delà des expertises. C'est pas additionner des gens avec des expertises différentes, c'est dépasser l'expertise.
Oui, les croiser, les relier.
C'est la question au départ, la clé du futur. C'est-à-dire comment créer des gens qui ont une capacité à échapper à leur formation initiale pour labourer l'inconnu, le nouveau, et créer des réponses adaptées à des complexités nouvelles.
Merci beaucoup, parce que ça, c'est vraiment un bon pont vers nos prochains intervenants. Je parle de vide. Parce que je pense que ce croisement des savoirs, de la transdisciplinarité, et surtout regarder dans des lieux et des avant non-lieux qui deviennent peut-être les lieux de connaissance. Et voilà, ça, je prends le fil de toi et je l'amène aux collègues.
Merci beaucoup, Jean-Louis, et puis à bientôt. Au revoir. Et pardon encore pour ces coupures. Hein.
that give me the chance also to thank the Technic team, because since now everything went so well, and you really worked hard, and congratulations and thanks that you are with us. So I hand over to my colleagues, which are as a team already very international, and in the same time they also on different places. So so it's mixing also the experience. And I start with Hubert Klumpner. And I invite you, Hubert, to say one word from which perspective you are speaking. So we don't make the biography discussions, but just to say from which standpoint, as a citizen, as a designer, as architect, urbanist, what's...
Yeah. Well, I speak to you as an architect and as an urbanist, but also as an activist.
Thank you. That leads me to the title you gave to this session, and which is a very very central topic, which we already touched in the different discussions, and I will come to this in a minute. But first, we would be interested to hear what brought you to speak about the modern normal in this session.
Yeah, modern normal, what is that? We hear about a lot of different conditions today, but I very much like this idea that we are trying to coin here, which is the modern normal. And obviously we're relating ourselves here to modernism, a modernism that had the ambition to conquer the world with Western ideas and Western industrial commodities and Western economic and social models. And I think now, after the Second World War, after starting a new millennium, more than 70 years later, the normality that we're finding today is a sort of an equilibrium between all the things that seem to the Western world strange, informal, different. And what I always like to say, while I was living in Caracas and I had a lecture somewhere in Western Europe or North America, was you are the exception. How things are running in Caracas in Venezuela, where I spent a lot of my professional life, that is the normality. And I think there's still some truth to it. And this modern normal illustrates that we have to come to grips that there are other societies, other ways of thinking from indigenous worlds, from outside of our, so to speak, progressive world that are normal as well. They're as normal as things seem to us. And if we accept that, I think we have a much more interesting basis to start working again. I think there's a sort of a struggle, and with this, if we accept this modern normal as a baseline from which to start our thinking, it will be a lot more interesting and a lot more healthier and a lot more integrative of everybody who's actually around us, from a migrant to a mayor to any stakeholder that there might be. It puts us on a new baseline to start our thinking and to start our working, which in my case is obviously also projects and developing projects and making prototypes.
And what do you think is the model? It's the modern normal which is in crisis. What are aspects you spoke about? Western ideas of economic, social, but what does this mean for your discipline also? Which idea is in crisis, and what could be interesting alternative in the other normals? So I would bring it in plural.
Well, obviously, if you look at urbanization, which is one of the things that I'm most interested in, I'm not speaking about cities. I want to distinguish that. I'm not speaking about cities in particular. I'm speaking about urbanization, which is something different, but it is very often mixed. Then we see that in this process of urbanization, there are other forms how people organize actually their lives, and they might differ to the models that we're looking at if we compare to the OECD countries, which are only 38 countries. But this seems to be there seems to be an attempt, a normative attempt, to look at how things should be, and everything which looks different is already a crisis. And I actually try to establish in this discussion a position away from crisis. I was yesterday in a supermarket and the light went off for a minute. You know, the cashier didn't work anymore. Nobody could pay anymore. The doors didn't open anymore. And it made a sort of a standstill suddenly. I'm talking about the south of Germany, where I am at the moment. I would say, while I am in South America, a breakdown in electricity is nothing special. This is not a crisis situation. And I think we're also figuring out now that the citizens, the identities of citizens, are much more resistant to what is already a crisis for most people in the Western world. Our infrastructure, the fragility of our systems, and the breakdown that we usually expect that this is being fixed by an invisible hand, somebody who takes care of us. I think putting this idea, which is also a consumer idea, that somebody will fix it, somebody is taking care of me, somebody will stand there and take care that everything is all right. Putting this against a society of producers, a society which also knows how to repair, how to fix, how to survive, how to jump, how to pull and how to push if it's necessary. I find it actually very enriching, and in this bigger paradigm, because there's still a bigger paradigm, I think we still, if there is a crisis somewhere, we can look at the climate. Yes, there's a crisis, and if we want to become more active in this environment, it is probably the best opportunity that we have in the last couple of decades to wake up. It's a wake-up call, and I'm not cynical about it. I'm very much aware that a lot of people are in big trouble. They're losing their work. They're losing a lot of what was given to them. But I think if people would stick together a bit more, also something that I have learned in the cities and in the places of the South, if people would show more solidarity, in particular in the Western world, if people would be ready to share not only their car, but to share the space in which they live, the food that they eat. I think, in particular in the Northern Hemisphere, we are so wealthy and so rich. I don't think that this is a real challenge, and I think that, we need probably to design mostly our organizational models rather than we need to think about concrete and steel in terms of transforming our environments.
This is a very interesting concept for an architect and urbanist to say that it's maybe in the first line important to construct organizational architecture, then in the first front physical. In the next projects which you present with your colleagues, we will speak about examples to translate this ambition into form. But before that, I would once again turn around this question of modern, because we had, for example, Lars Müller, who spoke about, also in our discussion here, spoke about the relation between the modern concept and democracy. And he pointed out that for him, the last area was, the modern area was for him also marked by democracy. And it's an interesting question how we can work in a new form of normal, which take some aspects, relevant aspects from the old concepts, but to bring them in a kind of creolization, to bring them in exchange of these other normalities, because until now, as you said, it was a very authoritarian form of modern model.
Well, I would say the dream of a larger democratization somehow is what I see happening is not real anymore. I think there's a lot more. Look at the countries in the world. You actually have every year less so-called democracies. Obviously, there are different ways of democracies, but you also see that you find inscribed in autocracies. You know, there are civil movements, social transformations within autocratic systems, which perhaps are also reborn ways of how people can organize themselves in something which is a new format of democracy. I think we have to reinvent also what that is, because the democracies of the social democratic political system of Central Europe and Scandinavia, those are not the models either. I find that this idea also, if you relate now to projects and if we transit to that, social transformations have always preceded new ways of also formatting and building our cities. Urbanization is frozen politics, and I believe what we see here, even in democratic systems, is a lot more extremism. That is pretty obvious. You see this everywhere, but you also see autocratic systems and people within those systems inventing new ways of working beyond the national states in other formats. And I think that these movements also becoming stronger. Let's not forget, national states are only 150, 180 years old. It's also an invention, and perhaps something new is emerging. And only once we understand that, we will see what are the next transformations in physical projects in those places.
What we just see before in Brazil is that organization could be also religious. And this broke the quality, I think, of the connections in between persons. This way to be together without this. So I think the discussion is probably not only about democracy and not democracy, but about like and religious.
Yeah, but man, you're mentioning religions. Obviously, religions are also, or religious groups are also organizational models which are transnational. Sure. And I think they're having a very powerful role, a very visible role. But I think it is not necessarily only because they are a religion. It is because they having the opportunity to unite people in some sort of belief beyond national borders. And that could obviously also take other organizations are able to do this too. But I do agree with you that religious groups clearly they have this organizational power.
Mm. What I think is the strong aspect, what you said, is this our zero, where we can make really a kind of restart, and this struggling of this very dominant and hegemonic model, which dominated almost the whole world, and which also made disappear all these interesting activities. We had a colleague from Burkina Faso here who told us that in this context where you have also an absence of somebody who's fixing your crisis, you have to self-authorize yourself, and you have, for example, to work on self-defense or to immune defense concerning corona. You work on social cohesion. You organize help between neighbors. So this kind of absence of authority helps to self-authorizations. And I think this we have seen also in the crisis here in this moment, that in the first moment of the crisis in the areas, so in the banlieue, for example, there were more self-activation, more because there was strong social cohesion, and the initiatives were very interesting, and it was possible because of the absence of the official power. They and I think this is interesting.
And this brings you to the formal and informal aspect. Huh? The informal give power to people.
And
yes, that obviously depends if you're coming from the world of informality. That is also a normality, right? Informal is only in the eye of somebody who doesn't understand the system. So we have tried to bring this sort of framework actually in the debate of architecture and urbanization, but at the end of the day, I think this is also suspended. And at the end of the day, and I think this is also what we're trying to do with our projects, we have to be clear what we are really interested in, right? Because you can use a lot of words, you can describe a lot of conditions, and you say, and then you give alternatives, but what is actually the interest of all of that? And I think it is a quest for a self-determined quality of life. It doesn't really matter, the access to finance or the costs of life. There's a lot of misunderstanding. What is actually quality of life? Look at very rich countries. At the end of the year, people pay their taxes and they hardly can cover their costs. We have created very almost absurd systems, and this has nothing to do with any sort of distance from reality. I think the quality of life is not so difficult to determine. There's almost a universal understanding that you reach in a healthy environment, an older age, without sacrificing every year something to reach what you really want to have in a couple of years from now. I think this quality of life could be determined in a series of descriptions, and it would be very clear not to lose ourselves in describing crisis, but really also to find methods and directions to what we really want to achieve. And I think that is actually not so different if you look around wherever you are on the globe.
I think that's a very good chance to transmit what you have said, and maybe you can integrate your second role, your role as also as a teacher, as somebody who does transmission of the knowledge, because we heard several times today that the education is in difficulties because of the official protocol, and I think part of your work as activist and architect is precisely to change the order, the organizational order, and I think you also did this in your teaching, because when you had this course in Vienna, or now the seminar week, you are precisely changing the performance. Maybe you can say one word and then come to your project.
Yes. Obviously, there's some performative aspects to it, to teach without a university building. I think that's an interesting concept. And I still believe also in universities and education very strongly, because at the end of the day, we have to reinvent our traditions. I don't think that everything be upside down. We have to make it better. We have to fix also what we can still use, and there's a lot of that. But we also need some radical discussions. But I still believe that universities in the world have a very important role, because at the end of the day, we have to think about what we are teaching the next generation of, in my case, architects, and what should they do. And I think right now, the young people have a clearer idea of that than the schools. And in that sense, we need we need to be open for leveraging that out. It's not a moment where we should send people back to their chairs and tell them we know. I think it's a great moment of having this sort of a co-designing processes also in terms of education, in terms of research, and in case in what we are doing in actually making projects to have proofs of evidence that we can bring back into our academic frameworks.
Super. So I invite you. I think this is very encouraging for the community which we are building this 24 hours, because a lot of designers are also teachers. And I invite you now to switch again your role, because now you will be the interviewer of your partners and your colleagues to present your project, and maybe you also can present you and your role, or from the viewpoint from which you are speaking.
Yes, I will very quickly just tell you who is here, and I will give everybody else the opportunity to introduce himself. I think will be a much better way of doing it. And I just give you 3 names and 3 locations where people are actually active, where they work. So there's Anne Graupner from 26 North 10 Architects, currently co-teaching with me, but she's a very interesting, powerful young architect from Johannesburg, South Africa. There's Diego Cerezuela, another very good friend and colleague of mine, who I welcome from Medellin. He's both teaching at the university there, and he's also part of our global network, and he's heading the projects we are doing there. And last but not least, there's Michael Walczak, who is going to talk about Sarajevo, a city where we also are working, and a place in southeastern Europe where I think we have a lot to learn from the non-aligned history, which basically is also a possibility of a very interesting future to reinvent those traditions. So I pass the word to each and every one of them, maybe to introduce each other with a few sentences. Anne.
Hi, I'm Anne. I'm from South Africa. I've actually lived in the southern hemisphere, probably the same amount of time that I lived in the northern hemisphere. But after studying in Vienna, I returned to South Africa. And I think I was very interested in the power that buildings and architecture could have in a country that sort of was a young democracy. And I think we were just talking about democracy, and what really sort of interests me is sort of the spaces in between buildings and how cities can work for everybody. I think that's an underlying theme, topic. And sort of my role is difficult to describe. I would see myself as an urbanist, an architect, a curator, an educator. I think depending on whatever the project requires, I tend to wear a different hat. And I think sort of in present times, it's very important that we understand what baseline we operate from. Because especially if resources are scarce, and we need to find ways to achieve maximum impact in our projects. And sometimes it doesn't mean that it has to be a building. Sometimes it's basically empowering people, or designing a project, or a process rather, or even designing a policy, or extension, alerting people to a topic that is not talked about properly. Yeah.
Okay, so that was post-apartheid South Africa, and I move the word to Diego Cerezuela from Peace Process Colombia, which I think as a title over the environment that you guys are working, post-apartheid, peace process, and we move on to Sarajevo later. Diego, please.
Okay, hello. First, salut, Vera, Rudy. Good to see you. Hello, everybody. I'm Diego Cerezuela Bisman, a Swiss-Spanish architect. working with Hubert already since many years ago, 2014, I think. And I'm currently in Medellin. I like the question that you did before, which characters we're playing. No? I think I'm an architect, designer, I believe, processes, not in objects, let's say, but I'm also a pedestrian, no? That's my Spanish vibe, and I think I found also a very good place after living in Berlin, in Zurich, in New York. I think Medellin also represents me in a way as a foreigner. I can say something here, I feel part of it, no? As Hubert mentioned, we're here. There's a peace process after 50 years of a conflict. There's also 1 million Venezuelan migrant crisis also going on. And of course, the pandemic, 6 months we were at home in a lockdown. But what I want to say is that what we're doing, what we hope to do with a lot of fantastic people is a positive attitude. No? That you Vera also said yesterday, we were talking about this, a positive attitude. No? That's our kind of activism. No? It's not pretensions. We would love to change the world, but let's bring it as far as we can. No? And then in that sense, I believe in culture and education. No matter what crisis comes, that can be a trigger of transformation. I think also this idea, what Hugo was saying before, what is the mirror that we're looking at? Is a northern neoliberalism what we want to achieve as a normal? Or is the normal something nostalgic or melancholic we're looking back? I think right now we have an opportunity, like maybe never before, also for solidarity, because this issue we're having all over the world, so we can connect, no, like we're doing Zurich, but with the Balkans, with Africa, find a lot of synergies there, and also to think in a collective design or co-creation of a city, more with an open source, like sharing what we know. We don't have to rediscover the wheel constantly. We have to make it better in every iteration of design. No? And this is why we're working on prototypes. And those prototypes, they really want to change a little bit this idea of culture as something you consume. It's a culture that you're a participant and you're a maker, no? Like a maker of the city, of the transformation of that culture. And this is why we're also switching from maybe this Guggenheim model some years ago of a container or of a city development or of an icon for a tourism catcher to really kind of enroot the culture also working in satellites, for example, in Barranquilla, another project that we're also working with you together. No? And this idea of not doing let's say, a museum, but doing a school of art is what we are very interested in. There's always a making of that you can visit, but that's what we are really interested in. No? And I said, like, culture and education can be really, there will be always a lack. I think we need more, and this is what we're trying to give more access to many people as much as we can. Thank you.
Diego, if I can intervene in your discussion, I think this concept of prototyping is very, very important. Is this at all the statute of designers, urbanists, architects, of creative persons to say we are just here to make prototypes? And perhaps other has to make the repetition of execution.
And hopefully better, no? That's also the idea, no? It's like, and this is something that we're doing, no? Working with Hubert at the ETH, no? We're a university, but we're also building, and we are not building in Switzerland, we're building in South America. I think that's also a weird but very interesting model. So we're really interested in that thing has an impact, not only, let's say, designing in space, but designing in time, no? Who takes it? Which stakeholder takes it later on? Not only an architect, as a policy, as an idea, as something you can plug and play somewhere, no? And the idea in this open co-creation is that someone might take it and do it better, hopefully, no? Or at least we told also the learned lessons. That's also important, no?
Well, what Diego says is very important, and that is actually that we have the luxury to spend quite some time on developing a project. I think if you're looking at the way how projects built and designed, developed, and built, it's probably too fast. You know, if you're looking at what value they create, also in who is actually in this chain from initiating a project to constructing it, who's actually benefiting from it. I think that we could do a lot better projects if we would take more time. And if we would distribute, it's not about the amount of money, it is more about who is actually getting what for what service in this realization process. And there's too much time wasted and too much money going in the wrong direction, which is not benefiting the project. This is why we are so interested in it. But I would like to introduce as the third person in this triad, Michael Walczak, who is research is focusing very much on the non-aligned Yugoslavia, city of Sarajevo.
Yes, hello everyone. So I'm a doctoral student between the ETH and the University of Applied Arts in Vienna, and I'm a collaborator in the urban think tank Next network. And what is my role actually in this is I'm an architect, yes, I'm an urbanist, but on the other side, I'm also a software developer and algorithmic thinker. So I would call maybe that field of urban informatics, or maybe I'm an algorithmic architect. So that's how maybe I could define my profile. And for what is it actually used? How is it used in the context of Sarajevo? Is that we basically building digital twins, so basically digital copies, to be able to simulate all of what we heard, what Anne just mentioned about policies, Diego just mentioned about time, and Hubert mentioned prototypes, etc. So we are able in the virtual world, which is actually the modern normal, we speak through a virtual medium now somehow too. So I think modern normal is also this digital aspect, the virtual world, where we are able to create evidence and to simulate future imaginations which we maybe have, and to test them in different scenarios, so to be able to make the good decision, you know. So it's an evidence-based decision-making tool, also to support, for example, policy making. And for the context of Sarajevo, what we're particularly interested now is to update also planning documents, zoning documents, the general planning documents of the city. And currently in all of the cities, they are in two-dimensional, and there is no aspect of time included, nothing. And what we are saying is that these plans should be three-dimensional or even four-dimensional. So they should be dynamic plans which can reevaluate themselves every single second, you know. For algorithm, it doesn't matter the component of time. So I think this is important to understand, because, for example, climatic topics, which are very important for such a plan, they are not in two dimensions, you know, they are in three dimensions. And I think, or even four dimensions with the time component. So I think with this algorithmic thinking, we can really support city making, support our prototypes, and to create the evidence to be able to make the correct decisions.
But I want to add something just to put in perspective also what we just heard, not only from Michael but from all three of my friends and colleagues, and to give it back to one of you guys. At the end of the day, I believe we are having at the moment a situation where we facing social and environmental justice questions. There's a big problem in a distribution, and also in carrying the weight and being confronted with these challenges. And I would say what I have found in my experience in working with all of you in those three different places is that there's no difference anymore between social and environmental matters. Anything that we are transforming in the environment has an impact on the social, and anything that we are doing in the social has an impact on the environment. And that is so important if I give it back to Diego for a moment, because Medellin made a name for itself, inventing, so to speak, this social urbanism. You know, it was the most dangerous city in the world, a city of drug lords, of an incredible unhumane situation. And after going through this phase of social urbanism, they have now adopted also an environmental agenda. And what you see in this city and in the development of the immediate surroundings and the country as a whole is exactly that point, that you cannot look at that separated. However you want to call it. Some people speak about nature or the people, or however you want to call it, but I think this dichotomy, so the discussion of rural and urban, or the countryside or the city, whatever you want to call it, I think that doesn't exist anymore. We have to understand it's the same.
Yeah, but Hubert, I think we see each day antisocial ecological actions, and we see anti-ecological social actions. So this is I think this is a position, is a special position to say these two are connected or have to be connected.
I think so. I think they are connected because any aspect, you know, if we look, for instance, not only designers mostly work in the realm of quality, which I think is one of the very, very important aspects that we still need to guard. Design creates quality, but we have to understand also what that means in terms of quantitative information, because it is not enough to make one excellent house in Switzerland. It's about making 2 million houses in the townships of South Africa or in the barrios of Latin America. We need to think also about those quantitative measures. And Diego, for instance, is at the moment also working on a school. Colombia needs to build 3,000 schools. They're lacking. Kids cannot go to school because this architectural framework, this tool of enabling this sort of education is missing. And we can only build those schools if we find out the right materiality and the right location and the right orientation. And certainly this is a task not only for architectural competition, but it needs 100% a collaborative mind. So this whole idea that competition and the fittest is superior to collaboration, I think it is not appropriate anymore. We really need to think about empowerment and enablement, because we are not going to make any change if we sort of trying to trademark and to protect and to license the work. It is a lot more about what you also heard. I think everybody mentioned it at one moment. It's a lot more about, yes, designing something, using your knowledge and your expertise, but also passing it on that other people can benefit from it. And I think this experience in the past, in particular in the profession of architecture, has not been really shared. A lot of this knowledge, a lot of this expertise, it went down with an office. People called it maybe experience, but what we need also in this educational model is more mentorship. And that probably requires also some more digital tools. It will be very hard to educate thousands of people across Africa and Latin America by sending them to the universities. We need to bring this in a completely different framework.
And what I see is that you also, it's not a one-way road, so that you also go in these places to learn, because precisely this knowledge which in the territory where self-authorization and construction has been done is also a source for your construction. So it's a kind of two-way experience.
Yeah, maybe I passed it on to Diego or Anne, anybody who wants to.
No, I think what you were saying, Hubert, Medellin, we're learning a lot here also. No, it's not. I mean, this knowledge transfer exchange is between it's two vectors of the Atlantic. No, with two directions, and what we've seen in 20, 30 years here that there's this solidarity between public-private, between society and politicians. It's really a very incredible example. No, if you all get together with solidarity, say like it cannot be worse. No, so let's gather and push for that. No? And on the schools that we're doing, 3,000 schools is an amazing number. No? It's hard, and I said there's always kind of there is a good idea, and how to do it is the big question. No, we as architects are not the ones that are going to change that, but together with the construction companies, they really want to push for that, and the institutions, whoever's going to operate the school too, there is the interest thing that we're working on, no? With the first prototype in Cartagena, the Indias, in the Caribbean, to later on see what we can extract and build in the Caribbean region, no? I think, for example, also saying about how to work together instead of against, no? Because there's also this model of competitions. Only the winners are the good ones, and the rest are losers. Which I think it's a very, very terrible way of understanding success. It's, for example, no, the Guggenheim in Helsinki had 1,000 teams presenting to this competition, no, for the museum, no. 1,000 or even more, no? Imagine so much human resources, human hours working on maybe even just one building would get built. Imagine all those teams. I mean, I'm just saying 50% of them working together to do something. That would have been fantastic. Maybe we were already, I don't know, with these 2 million houses that Hubert was mentioned, no? We will have all the solutions. So I think there also we, in our profession, we can, our role, we still have a lot to talk about, no? On how to be part or stay out of a model that maybe we don't believe in.
Yeah. Anna, I think I thought it's very important what you have said, that the role of the building in a young democracy. So it's the same to the other places too. The manifestation, because a building in the same moment is also a manifestation and seen as in a process. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about what you had in mind when you said this.
Sorry, I didn't hear you properly.
Okay. No, you said in your introduction, you said the role of building in the young democracy. So that's what you said concerning your site in Johannesburg. And I think this is we had some days ago a young Syrian architect who spoke also about the role of buildings and of architecture in peace processes. Or in war processes in the same. It can lead to war, and it can... but maybe you can tell us a little bit more what you had in mind when you put this out.
I think what was particularly interesting for me as an architect in South Africa is that sort of with a new political system, for example, we need to start thinking about differently about buildings, because they're not anymore like representation of power. So just to give an example for South Africa, and we're thinking about the formal, the informal, and how you could bring this together. So where the formal system doesn't provide, the informal system basically fills the gaps. And we were talking about sort of how it could be perceived from outside as chaos and unorganized, as messy and unhealthy and insane because it's not normal, or it doesn't fit what we think is proper. Sort of 10 years into democracy, there were like complete new topologies coming out. So, for example, the informal taxi industry needed to be regulated, and the entire inner city of Johannesburg was struggling with what to do with informality. And so there were like projects like a taxi, which is basically a big transport interchange that combines a market and a taxi place. And it really works on how people operate in a city. And I think sort of with what we are seeing globally now, perhaps we need to really rethink things in a completely different way, because we can't keep on doing what we have been doing. It's not going to change anything. And I think the challenges we face are actually opportunities to do something new.
And it's kind of what you're describing is also an architecture of relations. So it's interesting that we had algorithmic architecture, we had organizational architecture, we have physical architecture. So it's very interesting that you all have different architectural ideas, but it's always about building a form of relations or a space and time where relations are possible. And maybe we can come to Sarajevo because I think this is very interesting how to also introduce these new methods to create virtual imaginarios and to have the power to represent them. Is very interesting, and I think one of key questions is how to interrelate this virtual imaginarios with the local and existing imaginarios, also in the sense how progettazione, we have today also mentioned this origin of design, the Italian word progettazione, to project. And I think also we are working very much in the question of representation. So it seems that this is one of the big important aspects for your project there.
Yes, so maybe I can introduce again the concept of our temporary mobile studio, which we already heard today. We use that format as a teaching format where we drive with that studio into cities and engage locally with students, with stakeholders, with actors, universities. But we also take that laboratory as a measurement vehicle and drive, for example, to Sarajevo, where we measure the climate conditions. We measure the wind conditions, for example, in the whole of the city up to 3 kilometers height, where we then understand actually how, for example, buildings affecting winds, which then affect a climate situation in the city, which is, for example, an inversive climate phenomenon, for example, that the city is then somehow covered with a natural lid, as you all know, for example, from Chinese cities. But Sarajevo is particularly also affected by air quality, bad air quality, like also cities in Poland too. So this is a bit a known phenomenon, especially in a valley in such topographic conditions as Sarajevo is. And we use that vehicle, for example, also to engage with local actors and to visualize what it actually is, the current condition, to show it, because it's something actually invisible, So what we are trying to do is to make visible things which are maybe invisible, And what we also do is then, because what we realize is also when we do what-if scenarios, when we say what would happen if we would put a new skyscraper here, how would the wind go? How would that affect the climate? And then they slowly realize, okay, maybe that's not such a great idea to put a skyscraper here. And I think by giving the actors and stakeholders the power to engage in such virtual and digital tools, so that they actually place the things inside and see, oh, maybe that was not a good idea. Almost like a game, almost as a gaming mechanism to get rewarded or not, So I think that's somehow how we engage with evidence with the local actors and with the local communities to give them the chance to understand such complex information because I think through this medium of a virtual world, which is time related, I think such complex information can be communicated, especially when also people can engage with. And that's what we did with this mobile studio concept also in Sarajevo. Yeah.
Thanks a lot of your position. I will be very interested to go back to this future goal who could be self-determination. Huh? That's what you say, Hubert. This could be to say the citizen has this goal to have the capacity to be self-determined in her life, who is a very interesting goal at all. How this can be connected with the city construction?
Obviously, the most important thing that you can find in a city is the culture of the people, the culture of a place and the culture of the people. I think this is determining everything. We have been living now through phases where people have celebrated very odd formats of how to build our cities. You all remember there was Dubai and the Dubaization, and then came the next trend and the next idea. And I think there's a big misunderstanding that these models, which are basically models of the market, that these are actually city. They are not. They have nothing to do really with what urbanization is about. And I think we have to not forget what places are really about, how people build their places. If I look here at famous for its magical realism of Gabo, of Garcia Marquez. And one could say that what drives these cities in Latin America, in the Caribbean, Latin America, is a sort of an idea of a magical urbanism. People are building actually around the culture. They're wrapping around the culture the idea of what a city is. And I remember very well, we were walking with Diego and Oscar Murillo. He's a Colombian, Afro-Colombian artist who just won the Turner Award. Actually, he shared it with a couple of other young British artists. We were walking around in Barranquilla and we were looking at the graffiti and at the subculture of the place. You know, the rappers on the street, the people who are actually working in the backyards of their houses in an area which has been bulldozed down to widen roads, etc. There's so much culture in cities, and we have to be careful that in this idea, this market idea, which is very much dominated by physical form, that we don't lose this social capital which is in cities, which is the real capital, but a sort of a cultural capital. I'm not talking only about financial gains, but I'm talking about the cultural capital that we find in cities. And I think this is probably also the most specific what a city can have. And then no matter if we are in South Africa or in South America or in the Balkans, we will also make better places if there's an awareness. And with that, we can build, I think there's just as a sort of a checking out from my intervention, I still believe that in particular architecture was built from elites. Elites build cities for elites. Then, and this is what we're witnessing now in the last decades, elites are building, so to speak, for the masses. But and we're now entering a moment where masses should actually build the cities for the masses. You know, we need to scale up this idea of who is actually producing the cities, and we have to learn our cities again. You know, we have to learn what cities are actually about. They're a lot more dirty and they're a lot more complicated than we think. It is not this abstract idea of going through 16 sustainable development goals. We need to look in the concreteness of the places, and I think we need to allow different voices, but we also need to understand who's responsible. I think a lot more people would be ready to take on responsibilities, not only to delegate them away. That has been a big problem in what we have seen in urbanization, that mayors and citizens delegate away responsibilities to somebody. And I think this is an invitation for regaining those qualities and the culture of the city to take responsibility. And I think if everybody in a stakeholder panorama understands what that means, we will have a lot better and more livable and have a much higher quality. And then we can actually piece also together another way of urbanization. It's certainly not those big developer models. I think everybody knows that. But I'm giving that as a disposition to what it could be. Because if what it could be is better, then people will also do it. And this is actually what I see emerging in Sarajevo, in a place which is not exactly a place famous for good news. But I find there's a very, very interesting culture still existing. And the same culture that made Medellin an interesting place again. And also out of this struggle, out of this managing the risks of a place, in South Africa, all three places are places where people have actually taken responsibility in their cities. And I can tell you they have been in much worse conditions than many of the Western cities that we're looking at, clueless what you could do now. Look at the places who have been in crisis and how we can actually have references, concrete, real references, how they rebuilt their cities again. And I think there's a common denominator to it. It's very different, very much in the local, but there's also a denominator how to rebuild the city out of this idea of the masses, of the culture, and of the quality of life.
It's a very strong statement, very important. It is interesting. Lars said he hopes that the crisis will be long enough to have this openness to bring in these thoughts. And
I think Diego say yes.
And I think there are not enough places, but precisely we have to maybe bring also in irritation, and I think that's very strong aspect which you are doing with prototyping. You are constructing against the difficulties, and it's a kind of, you spoke about time, Hubert, persistence also, continuity, and to follow up different projects on the same time. And in this timeline, one project pops up and the other is not active, but you continue to follow it. And I think this is also a very important strategy to have this parallelity, also because processes are depending on different contextual factors. And I think this is important because sometimes we also give up too early, and you don't have spaces where you can guarantee this continuity. And that's what I always appreciate very much in your work. It's important. This resistance is very important also. Thank you very much. No.
6 minutes more.
No.
Maybe we bring back again a last round of Johannesburg, Medellin, and Sarajevo to sort of round it up.
Very good.
Yes, please.
I was just thinking, sort of, if one looks back at one's career and you sort of think, what are sort of the key lessons one learns. And I must say, at times it's been really hard to work in a need-based environment. But at the same time, I think a frustration is sometimes the best to almost bring out completely new creativity, because you have to change something. And I've seen it in some projects that, sometimes in the most difficult time, sometimes something gives and you come to solution that you wouldn't have come to. Everything would be easy. So in a way, I think we need to embrace crisis as an opportunity, but and also collaborate. I think collaboration is the key because cities are so complex. You actually need people who come from very different ways and disciplines or ways of perceiving reality to actually create new ideas.
Okay, on my side, sorry, Rudy, do you want to say? Okay, jumping. I mean, if normal refers also to comfort, I think we have to shake that out, no? Because it's maybe crisis is more normal, no? And I'm just thinking about in 2008, I was living in Madrid back in the days with a huge crisis, and also was through brick, no? The city, to build the city was a gold mine for the real estate market, no? That was also a monoculture, no, for Spain. Brick and tourism, for example, is kind of selling very cheap your values and your ideas, no? I think hopefully we'll learn something about it, no? And I'm really with Michael what he's doing with this information and sharing information, and we talked before also something related to open source. Like if people understand a little bit the potential that they have around and they're committed to change it, no? Who would mention you don't delegate to someone else, you take the commitment to build it up. The city is not the gold mine; it becomes the biggest opportunity, no? And then is when you really, with this information, you can little by little move the real estate market that is very predative towards something more cooperative. And I think that's the only way we can do it. No, together we are stronger. No, I think that will be.
Okay, yes. My call to the modern normal is to all the architects to engage and urbanists to engage much more in this world of software engineering and algorithmic thinking, because it's taking over, because we are as architects and urbanists using all these tools and using all this software and having data which we could access to understand much more what is actually around us and how all these things are coming together, that we should know a little bit what it actually all means and why I am actually using all these tools, and maybe I should develop my own tools to be able to do what I actually want to do, you know. And I think that's a call to all the universities out in the world of architecture, urbanization. You should be teaching these things in your classes. That's my call out of Sarajevo knowledge to the world. Thank you.
Yeah, perhaps just to round it up, because I like a lot, obviously, we are very much aligned in working in those different places, but I think our strongest weapon is also that we believe in the impossible. And why can we do that? Because we have seen actually that in these places, in Sarajevo, in Medellin, and in South Africa, that impossible things can actually happen, that you can shake off apartheid, that you can actually end a 50-year-long civil war, and that a city that has been in a downward spiral over 100 years, that experienced basically a continuous first, second, civil, I don't know what conflict, you go to those places and you find people which have incredible hope and which actually believe that they can actually make a difference. And I think this principle in believing in the impossible should actually empower us to want more. It is not that we can purely survive. It is about the beauty and the architecture and the places that are actually fantastic to live in. And we should not forget that that is actually what we are aspiring.
So much of this injection of optimism, engagement we need it, and I think this is super that you shared this with us. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Thank you for the invitation. Bye bye.
Thank you very much.
See you soon.
Bye bye.
10 minutes de pause et changement technique. Donc, en shutdown.